Salutations, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Codology and I make videos about everything and anything to do with modern society. So today we have an interesting video in store, and it's one that I wasn't really sure I wanted to make, but alas, it can only go downhill from here, really. If you've been watching this channel for a while, you know that I am quite critical of democracy as it has manifested itself in the modern context. And I think that this video will help to elaborate on why that is and on why I'm so critical of the process as we see it today. However, just before we get into that, I would like to give a huge thank you to today's video sponsor, Surfshark. Tired of trying to access cosmopolitan articles to be met with this screen? Tired of feeling like you are signing your life away to every Mark Zuckerberg demanding that you authorize their access to your personal data online? Tired of not knowing what the bloody hell is going on? Well, I have a solution that is pretty bloody brilliant. Surfshark VPN is what you call a virtual private network, meaning that your identity online is not only kept private but anonymous. And this is done by Surfshark acting as a middleman of sorts, encrypting your data like a trusty messenger between you and the internet. Surfshark has over 3,200 servers in some 65 different countries, meaning that once you turn on your VPN, you have over 60 different locations to choose from. And this is because Surfshark swaps your actual location with a new one of your choosing. Using the Surfshark app on your smartphone, your computer, or your tablet, you can virtually travel to any country of your choosing, depending on what you want to access on whatever site. If I want to access Cosmopolitan online, Estonia's got me. One of my absolute favorite shows on Netflix is Marcella. And even though Marcella is British, season 3, the final season, is not available to watch in the UK, but it is in the US and Canada. That alone made me decide to leave the European Union, because that makes sense. Just as much sense as not having season 3 available in the UK, where the show was made. But thankfully, this didn't have to turn into a nonsensical political issue, because Surfshark VPN allowed me to merely change my virtual location. If you use my unique code, Codology, linked down below in my description box, you will get a whooping 83% off, plus 3 months free. And I know you thought it couldn't get better than this, but I assure you, it can. Surfshark allows you to use a single account on an unlimited number of devices. So go to Surfshark VPN by clicking on this link and enter my unique code Codology to start feeling and being safe and in charge on the internet today. Thank you so very much to Surfshark for sponsoring today's video. What happens when literature comes into direct contact with the high-pressure demands of daytime television? Well, one thing definitely happens, and happened. The Oprah Winfrey Show established a rather infamous chapter of its history that ought to be considered the most long-running, publicized, and influential book club in human history. Oprah's ability to do this was groundbreaking. Historically, book clubs were a high society pursuit, but they served an important function. Upper-class women would gather in small groups in order to educate themselves and to become good conversationalists. They would practice the art of good conversation around such subjects and books which were deemed that of men. Books, mostly classics, were written for and by men. And so book clubs were a form of self-culture for women, because it required these women who had no formal education or the right to vote to organize themselves socially and politically. To truly grasp what they were reading, some knowledge of the outside world was inevitably required, because remember, these books were not written for them, and most book clubs in history had an element of defiance to them. They were a threat, and so these book clubs had something to and something of them which book clubs of today don't have. Whereas the book clubs of the past were threatening for their radical potential, book clubs are now thought of as self-involved and staid. They revolve around shared interests rather than shared concerns. fans. They don't do anything to challenge the status quo. And this represents a major shift away from the original premise of book clubs. For instance, the Wikipedia page dedicated to the 2007 romantic drama film, The Jane Austen Book Club, writes the following. As they, the group of women who form a book club committed to reading all 6 of Austen's novels, delve into Austen's literature, the book club members find themselves dealing with life experiences that parallel the themes of the books they are reading. And this is all well and good, I suppose, but there's definitely something a little off about this. And this sense of something off, for me at least, derives from the shift from book clubs being about the political and the educational to being about the personal, the introspective, the therapeutic. Because what reading nowadays within modern societies has become is a venture in self-help and self-identification. Books and their ideas no longer threaten the foundation of society. They don't serve a social or revelatory purpose or threat. I mean, Vladimir Lenin wouldn't even touch Dostoevsky's Demons. A certain dictator last century burnt books. Historically, books meant something huge. And now, they mean something huge, but in a very different way. Oprah Winfrey is integral to understanding the rise of the self-help industry across the modern world. Her daytime television show, which ran from 1986 to 2011, focused entirely on the everyday human, navigating their lives, its trials and dilemmas, before finding inner strength and self-improvement. Segments on the show included Changing Your Life Television, Remembering Your Spirit, Oprah's Favorite Things, all of which, alongside Oprah's book club, were integral to this understanding of the individual, the ordinary individual, being able to make of their lives what they will through perseverance, determination, and a good and healthy mindset. Or an iPad, one of Oprah's favorite things. Basically, there wouldn't be a multi-million-dollar industry around self-help if it wasn't for Oprah and her stamp of approval on the entire enterprise for roughly 4 decades. Now, this is probably going to be a little controversial for some of you, but I think that in the same way that Oprah was integral to the self-help industry, democracy is just as integral to why this industry is so appealing and flourishes. You see, the thing about democracy is that it is a very complex thing that can be very neatly and definitively packaged into rather understandable overarching themes. Firstly, of the people, by the people, and for the people. Democracy derives from the Greek words demos and kratos, meaning people and power respectively. And in this, democracy is literally translated into power of the people. According to the Council of Europe, democracy as an ideal type ought to be government on behalf of all the people, the majority and minorities alike, according to their will. Secondly is individual autonomy. Every individual ought to be able to control the direction of their own lives within reason, and nobody should be obliged to conform to the rules set by others without their prior consent. And thirdly, equality, particularly universal equality. Every individual ought to have the same opportunity of access to the means of influencing those decisions which affect society and its future. The most obvious example of this is universal suffrage. No country is truly democratic, and in the vast majority of cases, democracy typically means rule by and of the majority. However, the popularity of democracy, and particularly the appeal of its moral codes, means that it is almost inseparably considered a part of modern life and the modern world. And the ideal of democracy is fantastic, of course. I can't deny that. The reality, especially in the last 10 years, is greatly decidedly less so, because what this means penetrates to the very core of Oprah's book club. Democracy's appeal is that every individual is equal and that nobody should be subjected to the rules, the authority and demands of others without their consent or agreement. What this ideal has transpired into is not so shiny and glamorous, because the unpleasant fact of the matter is that irrespective of how politically illiterate you are, you have a right to participate in the political process and in political life. Your opinion and influence over the direction of political life and over decision making, the complexities of it all, is as valid as those who we would consider to be experts on such matters. And within democracies, to even suggest that somebody is politically illiterate is to put oneself up as being anti-democratic or elitist. And this is where Oprah's book club and its commitment to self-help comes into the picture. The thing with anything espousing to democratic principles is that it eventually falls into being considered that of anti-intellectualism and anti-expertise. Intellectuals and experts are those who have mastered particular skills or bodies of knowledge and who practice those skills or use that knowledge as their main occupation in life. Basically, they know considerably more about something than the rest of us do. And as such, we typically turn to them when we need advice, information, help, or decision making about something to do with that specific knowledge. And because of this, experts and intellectuals are a minority within their field, as well as within any given subject. They are a minority whose views are more likely to be authoritative, that is, correct or accurate, than anyone else's. And true expertise and intellectualism are a combination of the following recognizable characteristics. Education, typically higher education under the guidance of established experts and with access to expertise in the form of exclusive institutions and their resources. Talent, typically influenced by socio-economic factors and cultural capital developed from an early age. Experience, and typically experience that is long-term and is necessary to distinguish those who merely hold credentials from those who have actually held on to the credibility of their credentials via cultivating their skills over time, improving on their breadth of knowledge. And finally, peer affirmation, typically by other established experts, journals, and those within other areas of specialized knowledge who are there to either critique or are somehow affiliated with a particular field of knowledge. Peer affirmation enhances social trust in experts and ensures that the standards of expertise are upheld and improved. Democracy, as it has evolved in modern societies alongside the internet and the information age, posits that every individual is essentially an expert, or at least suggests that everybody can be an expert. The idea of any so-called privileged minority having such stark and impactful influence over decision-making and the direction of society is inherently undemocratic. And this notion under democracy that everybody can be an expert can be seen in the predominance and the fully fledged emergence of the self-help industry. Because although Americans are becoming less religious, they are simultaneously increasingly becoming more spiritual. The rise of New Age spiritualism and so-called internet spirituality parallels with our growing skeptical age, and it has been a particular attraction of liberals or those holding more liberal views. Witch talk, manifestation, and the wellness movement are only three examples of what people have turned to in an increasingly precarious modern world. The commercialization of expertise is another, far-reaching example of this, which is most obviously seen in the predominance of politically biased think tanks. American culture tends to fuel these kinds of romantic notions about the wisdom of the common person or the gumption of the self-educated genius. These images empower a certain kind of satisfying social fantasy in which ordinary people outperform the stuffy professor or the nerdy scientist through sheer grit and ingenuity. Self-help and self-therapy feed on this social fantasy. In my opinion, what they have done is largely replaced what used to serve as a middleman between laypersons, ordinary people, and experts, that is, public intellectuals. Public intellectuals served an important role. They had their feet in both camps, making understandable and tangible what experts were saying, while simultaneously humanizing and making known to the experts that their decisions, their expertise had real life and immediate consequences. Public intellectuals were those who critiqued expertise from the experiences and perspectives of ordinary people. Yet as modern life has become more commercialized and rational, increasingly seeing every opportunity and every human interaction as a potential money-grabbing opportunity, the label of expert has been more liberally and broadly used and appropriated in order to attract new consumers. Self-help gurus, influencers as experts, online wellness coaches, professional conversationalists, consultants. These professions have all replaced the public intellectual. The polarization of the university as considered an academy or the academy from the newly established and highly profitable university as business is another clear example. Students are no longer there to cultivate and stimulate their critical thinking and faculties. They are there as consumers, and the university will cater to their every whim because money. Citizens trust the political process less and less so. Voting is now considered more of a chore than something that one wants to do in the interest of society, if it is undertaken at all. And to be branded as an elite is as pejorative an epithet as being branded an expert these days. So I would argue that it is only understandable that the likes of Oprah Winfrey, of Dr. Phil, of podcasts hosted by so-called relationship and dating experts, reality television networks such as TLC with its infamous 90-Day Fiancé tell-alls, have been making a killing when it comes to drawing in audiences in order to participate and to view these kinds of talk it out shows. Public intellectuals beyond their niche and their very insular and select communities cannot compete with the money, the deals, and commercial time being thrown at these franchises, and no doubt the greater appeal of being told a social fantasy over being told the unpleasant, stale truths public intellectuals have been known to express. Oprah's book club offers you self-improvement and a greater knowledge of yourself through some of the world's most dense, complex, and difficult literature. And this is all done through a particularly self-indulgent form of reading literature that is very contemporary. All public intellectuals can and could offer were long-winded explanations, very dry and stale, lengthy books and essays, as well as their own very long-winded interpretation of the world as it is. Intellectuals' prescriptions for the various trials and tribulations of modern life are typically long-term and are reliant and dependent on the political systems we have in place now. The thing that Oprah and her book club offers are immediate solutions, quick fix solutions, the ability to start changing your life right now without any reliance on anybody else. Why depend on experts when you yourself are an expert, merely unaware of your own capabilities and talents? your own inner strength, your own ability to make change in and of your life and the world around you. This is a pretty rational response to a very skeptical age and world. And the paradox is that the irrationality inherent of spirituality, of New Age movements, is a very rational response to things. It seems that hardly anybody writes books for adults about anybody but themselves. If a book isn't about themselves or their lived experience, then it is typically either a self-help book, non-fiction, or a historical novel about some white monarch in medieval times. Or it's sometimes a postmodern twist on the typical crime novel. This speaks to the evolution in the way we read, which Oprah's book club is at the forefront of. That is, you don't read to find out about the world around you. You read in order to find out about the being that is you. And the publishing world has followed suit, because this form of reading and writing and publishing is where the money's at, but it comes at a price. Oprah's book club has been in several highly publicized controversies, all of which point to the failings which come from its and the publishing world's increasingly anti-intellectual, pro-self-help, and pro-self-indulgent approach to reading and selling books.
Who did you write this book for? Because it wasn't a book for me.
Take Oprah's decision in 2020 to drop from her selection the novel My Dark Vanessa. The novel was written by author Kate Elizabeth Russell, backed by a publishing deal all the way in the 7 figures, due to what was, in so many words, allegations of plagiarism from fellow author Wendy Ortiz, a Latin American essayist who had written her memoir focused on the same themes of childhood sexual abuse. Russell was coerced into stating that her novel was based on her actual experiences. Russell had essentially been accused of appropriating and taking advantage, exploiting the real-life experiences and trauma of a fellow writer. She clearly benefited greater than Ortiz did in terms of financial deals, publicity, and of course becoming a New York Times best-selling author. And even after Russell came out stating that her novel was in fact based on her own personal experiences, Oprah's team still decided not to feature Russell or her book on the show. And why did Oprah choose not to go down this road? Well, this was largely due to the kickback Oprah received from Latino writers and the Chicano literary movement after selecting to read American writer Janine Cummings' novel American Dirt. American Dirt was accused of appropriating trauma, relying on stereotypes, and exploiting the suffering of Mexican immigrants. Oprah's book club, intended to democratize the reading of literature for all to benefit from and enjoy, was clearly in a bind caused by such promises of democratization. And this is the bind which modern interpretations of democracy on the one hand and Oprah's book club on the other find themselves in. And I think that bind can be summed up as follows: that in our age, political equality, that under the rule of law we all have one vote, is being readily conflated with a contradictory and vain commitment to actual equality. The idea that everybody's feelings, opinions, and perspectives matter or can matter equally. Oprah's book club has democratized reading. Everybody can participate, can join, and they can do so like any professor in a stuffy research library. Not only does it condone an image of political equality that every individual can join, can be a part of this great and big thing, this notorious book club, the world's greatest book club in history, but it also condones an image, a social fantasy of this being equivalent to actual equality. Modern democracy has been increasingly doing this conflation of political equality and actual equality, more and more so in elections, in referendums, in policymakers condemning and ridiculing experts in pursuit of more votes, pandering to electorates for votes, pandering to audiences for higher ratings and views, pandering to readers for profit, all All are premised on a social fantasy, which makes the world out to be a lot less complicated and a lot less bureaucratic than it actually is. Like the self-help industry it bolstered, Oprah's book club gained its appeal by selling a social fantasy, that of actual equality, which, when tested, it couldn't live up to. When it came down to it, namely a microcosmic example of direct democracy in play, when Oprah invited authors, including Janine Cummings, onto the show to discuss the greater complexities surrounding the publication of American Dirt, nothing was solved. Nothing really tangible came from it. American Dirt was still a great success. It still garnered a great deal of profit for publishers, and Janine Cummings is an exceptional writer and is still deemed so, a best-selling author. Actual equality just isn't true, and it isn't a social reality. I mean, if we just look at Oprah's book club at its very raw, basic essence, Oprah is the one who selected and selects the books like an unaccountable leader, influencing the sale of books and most definitely the success or not of particular authors. Yet at the same time, she doesn't actually select the books. A team of nameless consultants do, based on what is going to bring in the most views and the highest ratings. Audience members, when the Oprah Winfrey Show was daytime television, were very specifically selected and curated in order to ensure that particular opinions and views were expressed. So, when attempts at actual equality were made by online audiences critical of Oprah's selection of American Dirt, a novel which I mentioned fictionalized the tumultuous Mexican-American border and was written by a white American woman, no doubt actual equality was called for by marginalized audiences when confronting that mammoth which is the publishing industry. Why was this book being published, lauded and pumped with fame and dollars, but not theirs? The difficult reality is that improving the publishing industry and making it more accessible is a far harder reality and venture than it is made out to be. Signing a petition, writing articles, calling out certain publishing houses, or more accurately, certain writers, for their bias or allegedly pandering to white supremacy is not going anywhere. And I would argue that this just has to do with the simple fact that direct democracy doesn't work, and it never has. The publishing industry isn't racist. The publishing industry wants to make profits, and it will do so via a multi-tiered and complex system of bureaucracy, all of which is directed and altered in order to make this profit-making venture a greater possibility for a longer amount of time. And if it means an awareness that its majority audience, who are white across the modern world, are going to gravitate toward a Stephen King novel, it's going to push novels endorsed by him, like Russell's and Cummings' novels both heavily were. If it means hiring people who prioritize its profit-making vision, it'll do just that. Penguin Random House, for instance, has tapped into the diversity market, and in all honesty, it can and it will do now, because that is where the money's at. And Penguin Random House is a mere subsidiary of a highly profitable private conglomerate, Bertelsmann, and is also divided into some 11 plus publishing groups and imprints. The passing of manuscripts from hands to hands, departments to departments, from deals to deals, cannot be realistically reduced to racism or appropriation when particular authors who sell are prioritized in the interest of profit making and outperforming competitors. And because for writers and ordinary people it is much harder to go after the megalodon that is the publishing industry, going after the easiest and most accessible targets, namely Russell and Cummings, is the only option left to audiences and individuals alike. It makes sense, but it doesn't necessarily get anywhere. It is clear that we have lost faith in experts in both the publishing world and in the wider society. Increasingly, we can see that experts and policymakers are in charge, not by active or meaningful decision, but by default. No democracy can function on default. While Oprah's book club promotes the message that you can change your life, that you have the solutions and expertise to do what said authors did or subconsciously advise, it's odd to audiences when that clearly doesn't translate into real life, when her very book selections demonstrate how impossible actual equality and the promises of expertise actually are. When such promises are made in the little insignificant example of a daytime television book club to the wider society in a political sense, things can get pretty ugly. But anyway, thank you so much for watching this video. Please like and subscribe, and I would love to hear what you think. Whether you agree with me or not is not the point of this video at all. I just do this for my own creative outlet, as I like to always remind you. So thank you so much for watching and giving me the time of day. I appreciate and adore you greatly, and I will see you very soon in the next one.